So just a bit of housekeeping. I mean, we're just gonna basically run into some of the nuts and bolts of cover cropping and pasture cropping in a bit of a different climate zone, because as Colin's methods were developed in Australia, so how we can sort of adapt them into some of these different environments. So Colin's going to jump in for a presentation around 20-25 minutes, and then we'll hand it over to. So if you have any questions throughout that, Jacqueline, make sure you just write them down, because we're going to have a time for questions at the end. And then Kev's going to jump on and just fill in any blanks there, and maybe tie in the cover cropping piece. And then, yeah, we'll have a good time at the end for some discussion and questions.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
All sound good for you, gentlemen. I'll just hand it over to you, Colin.
Okay. This little talk here, it's fairly difficult to get a 3-hour talk into 20 minutes. So I've cut a lot of stuff out, and mainly going to talk about principles and why I changed, really. So, and hopefully that stimulates questions and all that type of thing from anyone that hears the recording. Just a little bit on me. I'm in central New South Wales, which is 300 kilometres northwest of Sydney. 2,000 acres here, 850 hectares, just granite soils, and 600 mil annual rainfall. Never snows here, which is different to Canada. So just a few different enterprises. Our main enterprise has actually been merino sheep, and it has been for 150 years, but my great-grandparents settled here in the 1860s. But a little bit, run cattle every now and again when seasons allow, grow around 500 acres of crops annually, and that's all pasture cropped. I haven't grown any crops other than pasture cropping for 30 years. No irrigation. An enterprise which has come from restoring the grassland here, and it has been restored because of the way that I changed everything. It changed the way that I managed the whole property. Native grass seed sales is a major part of our enterprise mix. Also sell Kelpie dogs around the world and some merino rams as well. How can we be more profitable? Now, there's a lot of things people talk about, how do we be more profitable, but very few people look at what's actually gone wrong. We should look at what's gone wrong before we can move forward. And agriculture started about 10,000 years ago, and since that point in time, all that we've really done is killed grasslands and destroyed soil to grow crops and graze animals. And that's been a disaster. Until the early 1950s, agriculture was practiced without pesticides and small amounts of fertilizer. And actually, my great-grandfather was farming that way, and my father up until the 1940s, really, when he changed. Now, after the Second World War, there were genuine concerns about producing enough food for the increasing world population. And it was a genuine thing at the time, but a new agricultural revolution was developed to solve these problems. And it was labelled and called the Green Revolution, and developed high-yielding crops. And then fertiliser and pesticides were developed then to help those crops yield to their maximum. And maximum is the big thing and the big player in a lot of this. So, and that Green Revolution was very successful. It produced huge amounts of food, reduced hunger and poverty, and created wealth for farmers. And there's a reason why I'm telling this story, which we'll get to in a second. And I'm moving through this fairly quickly. Sounds like a great method of agriculture. And you'd wonder what could possibly go wrong. And in my father's year, and when he started doing this, my father was very much an innovator, and he adopted this form of agriculture really early. And you'd wonder what could go wrong, because it sounded like an ideal form of agriculture. It's actually been a disaster. a disaster for our farms and a disaster for our planet. And that's related to the declining soil health to start with, but dependency on fertiliser, dependency on pesticides, reduction in food quality, and human health problems. And now most of the wealth is with the multi-species, sorry, the multinational companies. Now this graph, and you've probably seen this because this is a Canadian graph. It was produced by a Canadian researcher from 1926 to 2016. But what's interesting about this, it fits perfectly in Australia and perfectly in the US and just about everywhere else where industrial agriculture has been practiced. And when you look, if farmers look at this, they should get really angry at the agribusiness share of this and want to chuck rocks at them, because they're taking all the profit and sending us farmers broke. And that has to change. And that green revolution really cannot be afforded. So many of the things we do in agriculture make someone else wealthy, not farmers. And from that graph, it's agribusiness that becomes wealthy. So this is the type of agriculture I was using during the 1970s. And basically, I adopted the form of agriculture that my father was using, and then and just mimicked that. But that form of agriculture was destroying the farm and soil and costing over $100,000 annually for fertiliser and pesticides. That's in today's figures. I converted that to today's money. So what I did was change the way I graze animals to holistic grazing management and develop a different method of growing crops called pasture cropping. There's a lot more in this talk than that I've done, other than or sort of the outcomes that I haven't got time to present in this little short talk, especially in the ecological gains that we've had from changing. But the grazing management that I adopted was basically Colin Seis' grazing management, holistic plan grazing, and with that we're running around about 4,000 sheep and cattle. When we've got them, we're included with the sheep. So, and about 2.5 adult sheep over 1 year old, or over 18 months old, actually. About 1,500 over 1 year old in 75 paddocks, and a 3 to 4 month or longer plant recovery period. Now, those sheep, especially the adult sheep, the larger mob, are used to prepare paddocks to sow crops in. And they're preparing paddocks by mulching, deliberately grazing and grazing harder to mulch the grass onto the soil surface, add manure and urine to it, and basically prepare the paddock to plant a crop. That's just a photo I took of some ewes with their lambs moving through a gateway. There's about 5,000 sheep there, and I just took that photo just to get a bit of an idea of the mob sizes. So pasture cropping, it's actually perennial cover cropping, and I started trying to use perennial cover cropping as a name here in Australia, and no one understood what I was talking about. However, when I started doing workshops in the US, when I called it perennial cover cropping, they got it straight away because they understood the term cover cropping. But and that's exactly what it is. It's perennial cover cropping. So I invented and developed that in 1993. So pasture cropping is actually perennial cover cropping technique where annual crops are zero-tilled into dormant grass or grassland, perennial grass or grassland. I just got some photos here just to illustrate it. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail, but that's sowing last year, sowing a crop of oats into dormant perennial grass. That's just gone into winter dormancy, basically gone to sleep for the winter. And we're planting them with a disc planter, or just a small air seed that I developed disc planter in through that dormant perennial grassland. There's a lot of advantages in it. When I first started developing this, and it was developed with a good friend of mine, Darryl Clough, we were tossing ideas around at the time. So we can produce crops for grain or grazing, but one of the good things that it does is restores grassland by stimulating perennial grass species and species diversity, improves soil health and increase the soil carbon levels as well. This graph which I use is just illustrates what it is, and this is just how grasslands function. And I realise Canada is very different to Australia, and you don't have the same growth periods as we do here in Australia. The southern US fits into this really well, but we're really just simply growing a cool season crop at the dormant stage of that grassland. Just a couple of photos here of the crop. It just looks like a normal crop when it gets above the dormant grass. Oats, obviously, that photo, it's been used a lot. It's been around the planet a heap of times, but it does illustrate what this does. The green amongst there, that when that crop is being harvested, is the perennial warm season grass emerging from underneath the crop. It doesn't compete with the crop. It only grows as that crop is ripening. I've shown that crop, looking at the time and going, okay. I've shown that photo to many different people. And if you show that photo to people that are just simply growing crops, don't have animals at all, they will just say, look at all the weeds in the crop. However, if you show it to a grazier, someone that runs cattle or sheep or animals, they will look at it totally differently, and they will say, look at all of the feed in the crop. Totally different way of looking at it. So it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but it's extremely low risk. If that was a drought and there was and the crop was a failure, you haven't really lost anything. You've lost the potential of the crop, like any crop within a drought. But we haven't lost the grassland, and we continue to stimulate the grassland, stimulate the soils and soil health. And so it's nearly difficult. You've got to work really hard to lose money with it. So we've got grazing after the crop is harvested as well. And we're also harvesting native seed from these areas before a crop is sown and after the crop is harvested. And that seeds is worth a lot of money to us. It's quite a valuable enterprise, mostly because there's no cost in it. Now that seed, we sell that for revegetation work mostly, to other farmers, but also just general rehab work. But now there's a lot of work being done on using this seed for human consumption. And like the native people all over the world, Australian Aboriginal people use these grassland species as food. So we're starting to rediscover, and working with Aboriginal groups here, to relearn the uses of these grasses that they use for 50,000 years as a food source. And we're not only learning a lot from the Aboriginal people, but getting some great knowledge on a different food source, or different to us now. Just a little bit on multi-species pasture cropping. Now, I developed this in 29 or 2010, about what's that, about 10, 12, 14 years ago, something. And that's still growing into a grassland. It's still a pasture cropping, but it's basically, it's very similar to what most people do with cover crops, except that I'm planting these into a grassland. So it's not actually a cover crop because the grass is the cover. And so I call that multi-species pasture cropping rather than cover crops. That's just a photo of it, just what they look like most cover crops, really. Many different species in them. The covers can be whatever most people grow. Now, the same reasons why a cover crop is very beneficial. I won't go into too much detail here. Great improvements in soil health. We can add nitrogen with legumes, weed control, insect control with beneficial beneficial insects, attracting them to flowering plants. We can still harvest the cereal crop after grazing, but the really good thing about these is the very, very high quality grazing we can get from them. And that's just a photo of one of these crops that we just harvested. We harvested all the seed in. I didn't know whether it could be done. And I get a neighbour that's a harvesting contractor to harvest my crops for me. And he thinks I'm a total lunatic. So, but we can harvest mixed species, which is interesting. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about a multi-species grazing trial that we did here. And there's some very interesting results in this, and I certainly would encourage any Canadians or anyone watching this to have a serious look at multi-species crops or cover crops for grazing. I originally was wondering about this when I was in the US doing talks, and people were just terminating their crops, and Gabe Brown was one of them actually. And I said to Gabe, why aren't you grazing these things? And no one had sort of thought of it then, but it was not unusual for us in Australia here. We've always grazed our crops. It was, and I just took this a little bit further by adding a few more species to it, really. I'll move through this quickly. I won't read all that out. We added fertilizer with this. We used a knockdown type herbicide as well. We can do these without herbicides and fertilizers, which we are doing a bit, but because this was an actual trial and monitored, I wanted to make sure everything was pretty equal, and so we did put some fertilizer and did some weed control in it. The cost of that multi-species crop was higher, about $40 higher. The grazing results are very interesting. And what I didn't mention there, we had a barley crop on its own and a multi-species crop with the two differences. It didn't matter whether it was barley or oats or whatever, but the weight gains on the multi-species crop, and I won't read all this either, were double. We grazed that and we just set stock grazed it. We just wanted to keep everything equal. And we grazed it for 57 days. The weight gain on the barley was 149 grams and 300 on the multi-species crop. So in other words, they doubled their weight in the same time period on the multi-species crop. These were merino lambs. And you probably get greater gains with a true meat breed. But also the profits were pretty close to double as well. A bit more than that, did soil testing, but soil chemistry as well as soil carbon. The carbon levels, and wasn't expecting an increase, and this was only in a 6-month period. These gains, I wasn't expecting these gains in that period. Carbon increased by 21% on the multi-species crop and minus 15 on the single species crop. Very similar things with all of those. Nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium. Now, note down the bottom, not all of those nutrients increased. Some stayed the same, some decreased. But that was a really positive result that those main nutrients increased under that multi-species crop. So just to sum all this up, really, all that I did was I changed the grazing and cropping methods, and that restored the farm and soil ecosystems. It also did things like control insects and increase soil carbon levels, many things, but I haven't got into all that today. But now we save $100,000. We don't spend that on fertiliser and pesticides, and made the property financially profitable. Thank you. I've got one more slide to show you, and that is to just put up here where my talks are in the US this coming August. So,
Amazing.
okay.
Thank you, Cole. That was bloody good stuff. And I can't believe that the cover crop in that trial was only $40 extra a hectare. Is that?
Yeah, that's all it was. Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
I usually use a few more species than that. It was right after a drought here, the 3-year drought that we had in Australia, and seed was a little bit hard to get. So I usually use more than that, about 10 or so in a mix, but
yeah,
that's what we used.
And for those that are looking for seed in the US, you mentioned that is it green cover seed are pretty good.
Yep.
Or
yep.
I'm sure, or get in touch with Kevin. I'm sure he
Kevin had done all that. Yeah.
in Canada as well. So maybe he can speak to that a little bit. And if you're in Australia, probably look up Grant Sims at Down Under Covers. He's very good.
Yep.
Jacqueline's just asked a quick question before we hand over to you, Kev. Has anyone tried fall planting of the root crop parsnips? So winter planting, I guess.
Fall planting, autumn. Yep. Yes. That's mainly actually when we sow them, which is about now. Well, March, April, May, which is in our autumn, in our fall. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't have to be right in the middle of winter.
Okay. Very cool. Yeah, if you've got any other specific questions there, Jacqueline, just chuck them in that chat there, or write them down, and we'll come back to them at the end. So then we can have Colin and Kevin probably answering them simultaneously, or working together to make sure we pick both their brains, because we don't want to leave them out. Cole, did you want to just turn off your hosting for a second, and I'll hand over to Kevin?
And away we go.
Beauty.
So for you, good evening. For everybody else in Aussie land, good morning. I had a very quite interesting week. We moved into a new home, and so today was the day to hook up internet, and we'll have to do some more work on that after because apparently it's not working. So anyways. So, the whole idea of the cover cropping, absolutely. It's not a new concept. This is something that's been used around. You had a question, or just have your arm up? Okay. Okay. Maybe you could see my mouth moving, but not hear me. So, and this is where, this past year I was fortunate to spend the year over in Western Australia. I jumped over to the Dunedoo and did a workshop there. So got to see a good chunk of what Australia is doing and what they're not doing, and how that relates back to what we're doing here in Canada and how we're going to make that forward, move forward. Let's see, what is today? Last week I was in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and there was an organic conference going on there, and I gave 2 presentations, and it's interesting when you're able to spend 5 days with Christine Jones. I just like hanging around her and just trying to pick up the stuff that she's forgot, never mind the stuff that she knows. So it was bringing a lot of new information to Western Canada, and moving it forward on how we can get these cover crops going, and using Colin's information of what he's doing and how it's working. and I stumbled across this by accident when I was trying to terminate an alfalfa field. One year we went out and did some late tillage in right before freeze up, and seeded or spring triticale that next year, and harvested the triticale as we would. And I didn't get a good kill in the alfalfa, and the alfalfa took off after it took the spring triticale off, and reestablished that alfalfa crop. Ken Miller, before he passed away, he told me the story about how he's able to. He had a hay stand under irrigation in North Dakota where it wasn't doing very good, so he went into with the goal of going in and terminating that crop in the fall. In the spring, all of a sudden things were starting to come up in lines once he got a little more active carbon in his system. So it's once again the neat thing of how we look at agriculture and what we're doing, this replication on different continents of what we're doing, how we're doing it, and we're we have different challenges. Minus 40 is not a thing a lot of Australians have felt, but it's something where how do we manage around that? So when we start looking at cover cropping, the first thing that I always talk to producers when they say they want to get into this cover cropping is, what are you trying to do, without having setting some goals of what are we trying to fix, what are we looking at, what skill set do we have, what equipment do we have. All of those things have to come into play. And so when we start looking at, okay, we want to fix this, that, or that in our soil, we always have to take a look and identify, is that a cause or an actual symptom? So that when we have poor water infiltration, what does that mean? Well, is it because we have a hard pan? Is it because we have, those non-wetting sands in Australia? Do we have, what are the constraints of what we're dealing with, or is that the actual problem? And so when I was I can't remember, David, if you were out there at Blythe when we started digging up and we dug up some dock in the field, and Blythe was telling us that this weed out in this pasture, people are going out and they're trying to eradicate it from the soil, from their pasture, because they didn't plant it there. And so I was asking, okay, so what is the problem with it? Because in that field we had some compaction issues, and when you see that taproot going down, it's it's trying to fix the soil. And so if in this case, what we would want to be doing is seeding some chicory or some radish into it. Well, nature's giving the tools already there with this dock to break up that soil and improve it, given the management and all the damage we've done to the soils. So that's, as long as that plant isn't poisonous, what's the harm of it? So once again, the dock is there. Is that a cause or a symptom? Well, it's a symptom of hard soils. It's low calcium, it's low mycorrhizae, it's compaction, all those problems. So nature, in nature's intelligence, is giving us tools to fix it without us interfering and setting this system backwards instead of letting it evolve and move forward. So when we are going through and we see, what our goals are, what we're trying to fix, when we are looking at solutions, we have three choices: good, fast, and cheap. And unfortunately, we can only pick two. If you can find a solution that's good, fast, and cheap, well, you should patent that real quick, because that is a game changer. But when we start looking at these things, if it's going to be good and fast, well, it probably isn't going to be cheap. If it's going to be fast and cheap, well, probably it isn't going to be very good. So these are the things that we have to look at developing the system and work within the constraints of our limitations. And, with these, it doesn't matter where we are, we're always looking at, in the climate, we're dealing with these wild swings in weather, whether it's drought, wildfires, and, in Canada, we always hear about the wildfires in Australia and how dangerous it is. But I think British Columbia has been on fire for the last 3 summers. So yeah, we get that, and there's actually in in the eastern parts of the prairies, some of the warm season crops that we're trying to grow during our summer Australian winters have actually had some setbacks because of all the smoke and the ash in the air. It's not getting enough ultraviolet light coming through, and some of these heat-loving, sunshine-loving plants, they're just not getting what they need. So there's been some setbacks in some of these warm season crops in Western Canada. The extreme rain events. I've seen the pictures of the flooding at Cairns this past year. We were at that one waterfall where it was a nice gentle waterfall coming over, and the videos I was seeing, it was just a torrent coming over. The windstorms, and all these different climate things. I was up at Fort St. John's, British Columbia, about a month ago, and I had to stop when I was driving on the highway because the blowing dust. People have overworked their land, and it was bare. There was no snow. It was windy day, and it was a dust storm. It really makes you wonder what if people are not paying close enough attention. But these climate changes that we're seeing, it isn't just in one part of the world, it's everywhere. And so what we need to do is try and figure out a system on how are we going to prepare ourselves to deal with this what wild weather are we going to get this next year. So what we want to do is, when we start putting these species together, is pick species that are going to tolerate different types of extremes that we're going to be getting. So whether it's hot, dry, cold, or cool, or wet, we want to have species in these mixes to compensate for that. So with Colin doing, his cool season mixes, well, there's no sense really putting corn or millets in it, because I don't know if you get any benefit of having in it, except for the fact that you're going to have a different root exudate in that soil, getting that liquid carbon in there to maybe to fire up some microbes in the soil that are missing those specific root exudates. When we're having these blends, we want to have some tap roots. We want to have fibrous root systems within these plants that we're picking, and adding some annuals, some biennials, and potentially perennials, depending on what your goals are, into these mixes. It's really important to have that biennial in that mix that we're putting, because when a plant's in the vegetative stage, it can release up to 80% of the carbon it gets through photosynthesis back as a root exudate during its vegetative stage. So that is going to be a good way of getting a lot of that liquid carbon into that system to get those microbes fired up. And when we start talking about functional plant groups, I started with the three. I started with grass, legume, and broadleaf. And I was at the one producer meeting, and they said, "Oh, so yeah, that makes sense. The three sisters, the Native American Indians, they would use corn, beans, and melons growing together. So then they would have their legume, the grass, and the broadleaf. Because broadleaf is, by definition, it's not a grass or a legume, so it leaves it very vague. So I've broken that down into the brassica group, the non-brassica group, and the forbs. And people would argue about the non-brassicas. Once again, it's very vague, but how do you have a heading that you would have buckwheat, sunflowers, and beets as a common denominator? So I have those kind of pushed off to the side. But when we have those five different functional plant groups, and then throw the warm season and cool season species into that of each one of those, and then an annual, biennial, perennial of each, now we can have that functional plant group. Christine Jones talks about functional plant families, but my computer up here, it cannot comprehend dealing with 200 plus plant families. So 5 I can usually work with. So when we're going through and we're starting to pick species and putting this blend together, we need to understand the ecological function of these species that we're putting in. So with that, once again, what are the constraints? So with Colin going through and doing that really hard graze, getting that animal impact, getting the hoof action, getting the urine, the manure, so he's building up the nitrogen in that system. So when he's going to put in his pasture cropping, then PKS is going to be there from the animal. So that's going to get that going. So does he need a legume? Well, he puts a legume in there. That's going to be a little bit of insurance. So that crop is going to have enough nitrogen. Does he put in a forb? Does he put in the brassicas are well represented. What happens if you put some sunflowers in there? What happens if you put some linseed, some flax? All of these different things that, okay, so what does that do to the soil? Oh, cool, it does this. What happens if we put in a beet versus a turnip? A little different functional plant group, a little different things are going to happen in the soil. So when we go through, we need to understand the function of that to then going back to matching the goals. And so if it's just, the carbon numbers that were being fired out there by your pasture cropping, beautiful numbers. And we haven't got to the point here of using that same level of measurements, because carbon is it's not valued here in North America. I think that's the correct way of saying it. So as I learned from listening to different researchers in Australia, they call North America the Wild West of carbon. So just because it's loosey goosey, no rules, and yeah. So anyways. So when we start talking about creating a blend for an operation, for a farm, for a paddock, for a field, first thing I want to do is I want to figure out the number of seeds per pound, seeds per kilogram, to calculate the number of seeds per square foot or per square meter of that seed. Then I ask the question of what is the plant density of that species in a monoculture. And then it's going back to what density is required within this blend that we're producing. So if we are looking at nitrogen fixation being one of the major goals that we're going to be looking at doing, then we need to ensure that we have the legume component is going to be well represented. So in the picture where where the little puppy is in, lots of different clovers. And once again, the thing that shocked me when I was in Western Australia, and even in New South Wales, when we started talking about species of using in these annual cover crops, it was the same thing. So Colin will look at the picture and say, okay, yeah, there's some crimson clover and there's some Persian clover, and there's some who knows what kind of millet that is. I happen to do that's pearl millet, and then perennial ryegrass is growing underneath. So it's nothing like it's we have to reinvent wheels. The species are there, the function is the same. We're actually seeding them at the same time, because we're just getting in. I should send a picture. The snow is finally leaving, for at least for now. I think it was up to about 12 degrees. It's really hot. I'm back into my Birkenstocks and shorts, so things are rocking. But they're talking Thursday highs of +1 and more snow. So yeah, I think the Birks might be get back into the closet again. But anyways, so we're not reinventing wheels. Plant densities are going to be similar. When we're going to be seeding is simpler. Our goals can be quite similar. So the timing is going to be the next thing we're going to be looking at. And, the biggest thing is looking at opportunities, so that, when is the moisture coming? What tools do we have access to? And so the 1 year, you could see that it was starting to cloud up, and I got their local aerial applicator to come in and blow on some turnips and radishes into my triticale that it was about 4 weeks away from harvest. I used Drew Lerner as a weather consultant, and he's been money well spent. So got it lined up, got the seed blown on, got I think it was about 10 mils of rain, and the cover crop started up underneath, harvested the cash crop, and that cover crop kept growing right up until freeze up, and it did its thing. So that the biggest thing when we start looking at the timing, okay, so do we want to relay cover crop, or do we want to pasture crop? Do we want to, what are we doing? We still need that moisture to get it up and going. So once again, whether I'm in Western Australia or I'm in Western Canada, we're still chasing water. When we start talking about British Columbia, early on you tend to be way too wet, and then July, August hit and you get way too dry, and then it can get way too wet again going to freeze up. And so you have those extremes. And so we have to be set up to be able to, okay, there's a window, we have to go and hit it. We have to get some seeds in the ground. We have to get that living root. And so when people say, like, how much growth do we need to make a difference? Because, for us, once again, to the Aussies in the group, we have this thing called our winter, and when it comes, everything freezes up, everything shuts down. That's it. And talking to Christine Jones, listening to Jill Clapperton, Chris Nichols, everybody says of that group, 40 days is enough growth to get soil improvements from having this cover crop. And so if it turns out that, we get seed in the ground, it pops up, and winter sets in or it floods or what, even if we get 7 days growing a cover crop is better than none. So when we start looking at, strategies of how to make our systems more resilient, and once again, pasture cropping, brilliant, because this is where you keep your soil armor. You have that armor there. You have green plants, you have brown plants, and when we are returning, and this is the whole thing when we look at how that soil functions. The soil functions just like a rumen, and so if we're putting nothing but green plants through a rumen, that rumen isn't functioning well. If we put nothing but straw through that rumen, the rumen isn't functioning well. When we put some green and some brown back into the soil or into the rumen, that rumen now functions properly, and our animals can grow. And this is the same thing in our soil. We can grow our soil. There's a guy down at in Oklahoma, Jimmy Evans, great guy, and he has said that he on averages grows his A horizon by 2.5 centimeters, 1 inch per year on average. So its A horizon just keeps dropping down. And so, before we sold our farm, we went and did a soil pit, and we grew our soil by about 25 centimeters in 15 years. So we can grow A horizon, we can grow topsoil. We have to grow it from the top down. So that soil armor, green, brown plant, really important. We need to reduce the amount of evaporation that we're getting, because anytime we're evaporating water, that means we're leaving salts on the surface, and that means it hasn't gone through a plant, which when it goes through the plant, it's capturing sunlight, it's putting root exudate in the ground, it's doing something to build soil. So it's really important to reduce evaporation. We need to reduce that erosion by wind and water. And once again, my story from northern British Columbia, and it's just not there. It's southern Saskatchewan, it's Manitoba, it's anywhere you drive, you can see all this dust in the air. And I'm seeing I'm getting some soil tests back from one of my friends, and from some snert. So snert is a combination of snow and dirt. And so he grabbed this from the ditch, he melted it down, he dried it out, and he sent it away for analysis. And he can grow an amazing corn crop from this snert that he collected in the ditch. And that's nutrients that's not in that farmer's field anymore. It's gone. It's no way of getting it back. So, we need to reduce that erosion. That soil, that armor on that soil protects that soil against wild temperature swings, so it doesn't get overly too hot, too cold. So, and once again, for the Aussies, when we say cold, -40, that starts getting cold. This -2, -3, that's nothing. But yeah, like we go from, in the prairies, we'll go from 40, 45 degrees Celsius in our summers down to -40, -45 during our winter. So, having that armor on there is that insulation. And it also provides insect habitat, just like Colin said. So, when we have that nice thatch on the surface, we have predator insects in there that are going to help protect our system from being overrun by the bad people. And so, or some bad bugs. So the other one we want to do is build that soil aggregate stability. And one of the things Christine or Chris Nichols has told me is that in nature's intelligence, when these microbes are about to go dormant, whether it's going to be too hot or too cold, what they're going to do is they're going to be they need this liquid carbon from this vegetative plant to then create this weatherproofing around these soil aggregates, and that weatherproofing around it is going to give it that soil aggregate stability, and that's really important. Once again, what's a signal? What's the way above my pay scale? But to have those stable soil aggregates really important, because it is going to increase our water infiltration. It's going to increase our water retention in our soil. So in these sandy soils, if we do have them, decently aggregated, that's great because the water can go in, but where does it stop? So increasing our aggregate stability, it's going to be able to store that in the reach of the plants and the bugs that we're growing. It's going to increase the amount of nutrients we can cycle. It's going to increase our root growth. And so when we are looking about this plant diversity above ground, below ground, Cotswold Seeds has this great chart. If you go on their website, you can download their PDF, and it gives you a visual of what's happening above ground, below ground. And when we have this diversity, we want to have that diversity of different plant periods throughout the growing season. We want to have those, we want to have that diversity because it reduces the stress by reducing the amount of competition. Once again, like species within right beside each other, they'll grow toward each other. They'll sense the roots of the same crop type, and they'll actually start growing away. So there's negative growth implications of that. Whereas if we have different species growing side by side of different species, they will commingle. Those roots will intermingle, will share the microbiomes of the plants, will develop a stronger system out of it. And so those different plants can create these synergies. We can get the mycorrhizae cranking, we can share that microbiome, and we have the different root systems so that we have some shallow rooted stuff here right beside something that's going to drill down deep. And if we have that mycorrhizae, now that mycorrhizae, that deep taproot can bring up water and share it with that shallow rooted species. So we can develop a system that's going to be working together. So when we have a system like this one on the left, I kept it in the soil or sit in water for 3 days, and it still stayed together. Where the one on the right, well, in 5 minutes, it was completely slaked apart. And so this is what we want to do, is have that stable soil aggregate so that we build the soil. We can have roots growing. We can have more water. We can capture more carbon. We can keep reducing the amount of synthetic requirements that we're adding to the soil. So there's the last couple of years I was custom grazing bison. And if you can just kind of close your eyes and imagine 5,000 of these critters walking in front of you, and not returning for maybe 1 to 3 years. The hoof action is some tillage. They're going to be grazing. They're going to be urinating. They're going to be dropping manure. They're going to be fertilizing the system. And so we have to look at one of the things about bison is they're natural herders, really tight herds. So they're nature's mob grazers, so that we can get these things moving, and they're always on the move. They're doing good things to soil and how they're grazing, how they're being managed. So we have to replicate that. And so the whole idea of the holistic grazing is crucial. And once again, David Montgomery's book, Dirt, the Erosion of Civilization, he goes through a lot of the different civilizations of the world, and they're destroyed in a lot of cases by improper grazing. So, we need to become more diligent on our management on what we're doing and how we're doing it. So, so that's a quick summary of what some of my thoughts are, and we'll open up for some discussion.
Incredible. Thank you, Kevin. That was really good. It's got my noggin jogging. Definitely be putting the Birkenstocks away, I think. Wow. Very cool. Thoughts, questions? I think there's a lot to unpack there. Is that, and I don't know if Kev, have you met Colin before?
We've had chats in the past, but I've been following his work and I love what he's doing. And just trying to, how do we integrate that into our climate? And like I said, down in Mississippi, absolutely. When we start moving further north, how do we do it? And my thought process is having these perennials, setting them back hard in the spring so that they're, if they're already established, they're going to be really competitive. So, but if we can set them back far enough, get that cash crop into it, because when we start looking at, and once again, the fungal bacteria ratio, if you listen to Elaine Ingham, when we start dealing with declining productivity in our pastures, it's usually because we get our fungal bacteria out of whack, which translates back to we have low activity of our bacteria in these soils, and it's because we're getting less and less root exudates. So having these annual crops being put into rotation is going to, even though it's going to be, with the disc being very little disturbance, you're still opening that soil up. You're promoting a little more bacteria. You put a growing plant in there in that vegetative stage for 40 days. If you're just dealing with annuals, those root exudates are going to be firing up and getting that bacteria up and going. You're going to get nutrient cycling. That next pasture crop, you're going to be your pasture grass, your perennials, they're going to be starting to wake up and get going. Yeah. So, just absolutely brilliant science from the science standpoint. It's solid.
Yeah, just to comment on that too. It is difficult in northern climates where it's very cold, and having developed it in Australia, it was relatively straightforward here, as it is in the north and southern parts of the US, or from the centre to the south. But I've been communicating with some Europeans and people in colder climates, and I think it needs to probably move. It needs to be adapted or changed to suit the environment it's in, but it can be a form of companion cropping, which I think is the way probably a lot of these things need to go. More companion cropping and plants that are compatible with each other. We know that from gardens. We know that some plants are compatible, some not. So that, I think, is part of the answer to that, of combining a few different things.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The more we do, the more we learn.
That's it. Amazing how the framing can add so much, I guess, to the mental model, with what you call it. Yeah, I love that. Jacqueline, any thoughts from you? I know you put a question in there. Did you want to just shoot that at?
Yeah, sure. So I've got like this property that we're going to be closing the deal. It's 160 acres, and it's going to become a privately managed research facility. And I'm going to be implementing this for you, okay? And so where I'm at is there in my mind, okay, is possibly some people in where there is snow, maybe they would seed something in the late fall, like a ryegrass that might contribute to a hay crop. Because what I'm focusing on is animals. I have cattle, sheep, and goats. And so it's not that I'm so much interested in growing grain at this time. So that's the one, is that possibly we could seed very late in the fall so that it would, after we cut hay, because that's kind of, and then we could even graze it a little to boost it and then seed into it. That is sort of what I'm wondering. And then because I did a lot of market gardening, what I discovered here in Canada, we can seed like carrots and parsnips and beets and things like that in the fall. But you gotta time it so that you catch it, that it's late enough that the seed stays dormant. It's timing with the dormancy. And then those crops could potentially emerge in the spring and then be, you know, say it was for grazing. So I can see there, like for the Canadian audience, I think would be interested in crops that can contribute to their hay or contribute to their grazing. You know, and not, and I'm not familiar with anyone who might be wanting to apply this for a grain harvest, you know, myself. And so that's kind of what I'm really, you know, intrigued. I feel really hopeful about this, Colin. Like I've been a strong advocate. I found you really early a long time ago, and I just never had my own particular land that I could fully do this, but I'm going to do some small scale because I really work more for the family size producer and families and individuals, sort of that, you know, neglected, you know, the people that actually are producing most of the world and the food in the world are small farmers. And then there are these mega giants, right? And everybody, it's about everyone. It's about everyone firing on cylinders and moving us in this direction. And so what my research is connected to, in fact, there's a new article just published in the Nature Journal. It's about climbing to Mount Everest, and I highly recommend you read it. Okay. The lead scientist who published it, Dr. Laszlo's, he's the science advisor on this project that I'm involved with. And so what's been discovered is that when the plant animals, okay, eat the most similar foods that nature provides, so grass-fed, okay, there's the heavy isotope called deuterium. And we've only really learned about this. Genetic modification has allowed the plants to concentrate this heavy isotope, whereas plants and all species have developed to try to prevent it from accumulating. Okay, so what's happened is we are now being exposed to dangerous levels of the substance. Now, there's very few papers out yet, very few, but they have tested this, and grass-fed dairy compared to, you know, feedlot dairy, when they test the animal's milk or flesh, the natural, more natural, is 25 parts per million lower. Now, it's all measured in parts per million, okay? If the levels in our body hit 150 to 155 parts per million, it's terminal. This substance triggers it accelerates every kind of human ailment, okay? In fact, this is why it's part of what's called metabolic therapy. But so say a commodity raised animal, maybe its flesh is 140, but if you're raising it on vegetation only, no grain, and it's 25 parts per million lower, that can mean life for someone who's dealing with cancer, because there's 30 years research on this. When people become aware to reduce exposure to this substance, it's not that we can't have some, okay, but it's that it's too high. But if this is incorporated, 9 million, it's estimate, die of cancer every year in the world. 7 million would stop dying of cancer if they were able to implement this protection. And like this is like so new. This is so new. There's no laboratory in Canada that can test the concentration of this substance in the food supply. But because of the project I'm connected to, I have a lab in Hungary we're sending samples to. And so this is what I'm doing, is looking at, and so like I feel possibly even the grain, Colin, that you've been producing may be lower in deuterium than the commodity growing grain, okay? Because the deuterium has a higher a propensity to bind with carbon molecules. So when the plants do photosynthesis, now this deuterium it's an interesting thing, and I can send you more information, but it has a stronger binding with carbon, so it goes more into the sugars and starches. And so if people that are dealing with this, they'll go to an animal-based diet. Okay, so right now animal-based foods are being hyper vilified. This is the mechanism for us to say, hold on. There's something really beneficial health-wise when we nature mimic and have our animals eat this way. And so it's so thrilling, because you see, when you're talking about increasing the biology and the diversity in nature, the organisms that have the highest tolerance for deuterium are the microorganisms and the insects. So it's like the simple organisms use it more. And as we go up the food chain to the more complex being, less and less deuterium is able to be tolerated. Okay. And so, in all honesty, like seed oils, it's like close to 250 parts per million in the GMO seed oils. This is, I cannot stress enough, it's fatal. Okay. And so this is not something we can just attack head on, because the system is so deeply affected and doesn't have the ability to quickly change. And so really it's at the individual empowerment level, like people can begin to produce their own food. They can become more conscientious of where they source the food, if they care about this, right? And so it's really exciting, because we're right at the beginning of it. And I feel that Colin's work is going to be a very relevant part to restore those soils so that they have the ability to filter out more deuterium, because that's what it's about. It's about filtering it out. It's a natural substance. It's everywhere. It's in the oceans. And just so you know, Colin, my hypothesis is desertification is what has mobilized deuterium into the environment, because ice core sampling going back 10,000 years, the entire Earth's environment only had about 98 parts per million mobile. And so when did desertification start? Because it's like this substance gets stored in living tissue and in the soil, because it's made of the composted carbon, whereas so the deuterium is being held kind of in a benign state in that way. So soil erosion on the large scale, I feel that this deuteronomics, the first university in the world, Amsterdam, is the first university that's actually got a class on it. And Dr. Lazlos is kind of the lead on that. And so it's nice to know there's still good things coming. Okay.
There's a lot to be hopeful for, that's for sure.
Yes. And I just wanted to share that with you guys, because, it's a big journey.
Yeah.
Like we're a long way from the goalpost, of course, but at least there's, some clarity. There's more benefit there than maybe we even at first realized, because how do we get people really inspired to make these changes? Right. So yeah, and I'll keep you guys up to date on
Yeah,
the application.
please,
Yeah.
Jacqueline, if you could share that paper, so we can do a bit more reading on it.
Yeah.
Because
I'll
I think the
And
deuterium thing is
that's one of the reasons. Go ahead.
okay. Oh well, I was just going to say, we've had this sort of hunch in the regen ag space that the food being produced in these biological systems is healthier, but generally haven't understood the science maybe behind why that is so. But it sounds like this deuteronomics could be that missing link of the puzzle that actually explains how those foods are affecting our biology differently. Sorry, Kev.
And so this is where, Dr. Muir had a good fortune to spend a couple of days with him too, and one of the leaders of humates in the world. And he says, this green and brown is really important in returning back to the soil. So, whether, stuff that we're doing here in Canada, Colin, the stuff you're doing, we have the brown material and the green material going back in. So when we have that brown material going in, it's the precursor to a lot of the humic acids, whereas the green plants will release a lot more fulvic. And between the two of them, because they're smart chelators, they will tie up that, whatever toxins are in our soils. So when we have an increasing organic matter in the soil, and this is the reason why I was really gung ho about getting over to Australia to get involved with the carbon market, because of the fact that I knew that when we get more carbon in the soil, we have more organic matter, we have more humic, we have more fulvic in the soil. We're going to be changing the world. They're going to be leaders of making serious change. And then meeting, I spent 4 or 5 days with Haggerty's. The stuff you're learning, absolutely unbelievable. And so it can be done. So, these are the things that we need to do and once again, the liquid carbon going through the system, we have to keep that going. We need to keep it firing. We need to keep building more carbon in our soils. And this way, I'm dealing with a dairy in northern Saskatchewan at Prince Albert, and we've got most of the starch out of his diet for his dairy herd, and his vet bill has dropped. His milk production's up, his milk fat production's up, and we've cut his supplement and feed cost by 2/3. Never mind, he's not using any synthetics. He's using polycrops for his silage, and we've increased his soil organic matter by 1% a year for the last 6 years. So we went from 9% organic matter to 15%. And it's these stories that you hear, and then okay, so that's cool. So he told his friend just north of Saskatoon, and he went from his conception rates of 10%. We got him back to 90% conception rates in his cows. Okay, so he heard about it, so he tells his friends around Edmonton. We started playing around, and it just keeps going on these success stories of getting away from the starch, because I keep asking the people in the livestock business. I asked him, I said, what animal is designed to eat grain? Chickens, turkeys, ducks, they all have this thing called a gizzard, and then the monogastric, they can handle some grain. But these things with the rumen, we need to get roughage, we need to get away from the grain, we need to get into that water soluble carbohydrate to use as your energy source, not starch. Absolutely. Anyways, here's my rant.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Thank
Colin,
you. I love that. Yeah,
that's very cool, and I love that analogy that you used, Kevin, about the soil and the rumen. I mean, I've never heard it framed like that. So I think that's really helpful again for people just to get their heads around, because some of this can be quite complex.
A little bit,
especially the deuterium stuff. That stuff's definitely over my pay grade, but I'm very interested in reading more about that. And it's come up a bit in some of our most recent podcasts that you may be interested in looking at, Jacqueline, one with Dr. Jalal Khan and the quantum health movement. So they talk a lot about deuterium depleted water, and a lot how the sunshine and different frequencies of light can actually affect our deuterium too. But I mean, I don't want to get too far off topic here, because this could go down a very deep wormhole, I imagine. Colin, I'm just wondering if you have anything to add in there about the again, just more practical elements of implementing this pasture cropping and getting that timing right in these colder areas or more.
Yeah, one I would like to mention is, I think it would apply to Canada. I spent quite a bit of time in Norway 20 years ago. I was over there teaching the Norwegians how to train working dogs, actually stock dogs. Totally, I wear a few different hats. So, so I was over there, not related to this type of work at all, but I a Norwegian farmer had heard about what I was doing, and he started just experimenting with it. And what happened, what he did there, and I think you do something similar there, he sowed a wheat crop. I think just as it was when it was extremely cold, but sowed it into very, very cold soil, so it didn't germinate straight away. It germinated as the snow was melting, and so he sowed it into a weed-free environment. That was his type of herbicide, which is great, a natural one, no weeds there. But what was really interesting, because Norway, water isn't the limiting factor, and it probably is in Canada and certainly is here in Australia. The wheat grew and germinated and grew above anything, ahead of everything else. Everything else in the paddock caught up to it, or kept growing, but grew underneath it. And I was there in the summer, and he was harvesting this wheat crop, and it was a really good wheat crop, but there was all this green stuff underneath it. But it didn't affect it very much at all. And everything was growing quite happily together. And I thought, wow, you know, this is a different way of doing this. And it might apply to Canada. If you can mimic that same thing, providing water. Certainly if it got dry, those weeds would start competing against the crop. But if moisture isn't or water isn't a limiting factor, they can grow quite happily together. And he was growing, I would estimate, at least 4 tonne to the hectare wheat crop. Very, very good wheat crops. Amongst all this grain, and he had heaps of feed for his cattle after he harvested the crops. It was very close to pasture cropping in one way, but it was more companion cropping, that particular one, which is sort of why I mentioned the companion cropping thing there before.
I mean, that sounds, from that picture you showed us where you were harvesting the oats over top with that green feed underneath. I mean,
yeah,
that's what we're working towards, isn't it? Is having no period where that land is in fallow, other than when I guess it's under snow. And that may tie to a member question that we had come through from Adam. So this one's where he's in Central Europe, so a temperate climate. His characteristics are that they're growing mainly winter growing grasses, so ryegrass in particular, and a bit of quack grass. I've never heard of that, but and so they've got a relatively short vegetation period, obviously, around April to August, September, so that 3-month sort of thing. So now, as it's shifting towards being warmer and wetter, the cereal crop, such as a wheat, is sown in September, October, and harvested in July, August. Therefore, he's finding it quite hard to find that window of dormancy to then get another crop in.
Yeah.
So he's thinking of maybe implementing some brassicas, some other legumes into the pasture that could change that structure a little bit. Grazing prior to that sowing, so really giving it a bit of a setback. And he's wondering if that's going to give him enough of a head start coming into spring to get that the crop that he sows established. So yeah, and anything you could add there. And his goal for the operation is to start growing more grain to supply his poultry operation.
Yeah. One thing we need to be aware of, whatever we're doing, basic agronomy still applies. Like if you try to plant something into another group of plants that are actively growing, it will fail. I mean, that especially if they are already growing. So we need to be able to do something about that, and an ideal way is without chemicals, if possible. You know, if you can do it organically, that is great. In some environments, and I don't think he's got one. In some environments where the reverse is the opposite, and those cool season grasses go into summer dormancy, and there is enough rainfall, you can plant summer crops into that. Just reverse it around. He may not be in that environment. Some people are in those types of environments, and it can work. So it'd be interesting to communicate a bit more with him and get a bit more information. You'd give him my email address and get him to contact me if you like, and then we'll see if we can sort it out.
I will, Colin.
That'd be interesting.
He's also posted it on the platform too. If you wanted to have a look at it's quite a big big question. I've sort of paraphrased it a little there but yeah. So Adam, I'll get that email to you, mate, when you catch up on this, and I'll send that over so he can. Even if we may be able to do another webinar that is more appropriate to the European, because I know we have a few Europeans now on there, so that could be good.
I'd been communicating with an Englishman that had a farm in France, and he was an organic producer, and he was adopting pasture cropping. He was growing organic wheat to mill. Was solely organic, and he worked a few different interesting ways out of it. He was originally he was very much a purist. He was started off planting crops with horse teams and adapting machinery, and making work very hard for himself. But anyway, so he's on the right track. What he developed was he planted his wheat crops wider, and to reduce competition in the meantime, he made a mowing system, just mowers that he could mow weeds, only competing with the wheat crop between the rows, and being organic, and that was working okay for him. So we need to do something about what's going to compete with our cash crop. I think the better way, the organic, there's a couple of ways that I've been partly developing here. One way is obviously grow cover crops and grow them dense enough so that you're then planting organically into mulch all the time. And so you can change the organic people from ploughing and get them away from that, grow really good, dense, high carbon level covers, and then start zero tilling into that and maintain that ground cover all the time. I think is the better way to become organic. And it can be done, but no organic system is easy. And the problem with organics is that we know that ploughing is not very good for the soil either. So
that's right. Yeah. He did emphasize that he wasn't. So he's looking to establish some new pasture with those grain crops, and he wasn't very interested in ploughing, obviously because he knows. So, and I think. So what you're saying there is then planting direct drilling into those cover crops, but they would be at the end of their growing cycle, right? If I understood correctly.
What he could do, if he's got to start somewhere, and if he's starting with a conventional system with herbicides or ploughing, to get his covers really dense, and Kevin, it would be good to get your comments on this as well, but grow the covers so that you're producing a lot of mulch, like a vegetable garden. We don't learn enough from gardening principles. So create that really good thick mulch that you can plant into, same as we do with a garden, and maintain it, and then continue that process. Have you got any ideas on that, Kevin?
Absolutely. There's actually a couple of French producers. I'm trying to remember their names, but yeah, they're seeding a forage rapeseed at some ludicrous, like 30 kilos per hectare. And I'm just kind of, well, that doesn't make sense. And then they said, no, we're doing it for the root exudate. We're not only looking for the growth, we're looking for the roots, we're looking for the exudates, then you throw in some oats or something to get that mulch in over. Now, okay, so that makes sense of that rationale. Once again, I was assuming what their goals were. So having that mulch in there, it's an absolute game changer of how our souls and our biology respond.
Yeah. Another way of doing it organic, then I get people to do it here, not so much to grow grain crops, but to grow it's organic systems, but mostly for grazing and growing multi-species forages for stock. and it's a form of what is it? I've forgotten the name now. Anyway, but tilling the soil in very narrow strip, like strip tilling. It's a form of that. Mostly you talk to the zero tillers and they have a heart attack when you talk about strip tilling because they don't like it very much. But if you can keep that narrow, and all I started to do with them is to just with a yeoman's type plough, it will just kill it 8 inches wide, and then a big gap between it, 2 feet between it, and you can get organically. You can grow some quite good multi-species forages with that manner organically. But again, the agronomic principles apply. You've got a little kill zone there that you can grow stuff in. So and that works fine for that. Not saying you're going to grow a 5-ton wheat crop with it, but you can start the process and get things in and stop full ploughing.
Yeah. Okay. That's handy. I think because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater too. Like you say, some of these systems are so far down the path of degradation that, if you try and skip too far ahead, then you're setting yourself up to fail, aren't you? So, and
yes,
I love that there's such an emphasis on your end there, Kevin, about the goals. I mean, that's so important and something we overlook too often, and then we assume people's goals, and then it's completely irrelevant. So, very, very, very good. Now, everyone, I am conscious of your time. I know we've run a little bit over here, but it's been a great discussion. I'm just wondering if there's any closing comments that you'd like to add, just to fill things in. We can always have another deep dive session a bit later down the track, but I'm sure Colin's probably got jobs to do out there. I don't want to keep him too long, so.
It's raining. I can't do anything outside, so that's fine.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah.
Well, just to address the one question about the late seeding right before the snow, we do a lot of that in the prairies. So we've had people grow or plant their spring wheat in November, right before the snow flies. So one of the keys that I look at for dormant seeding going into winter is I go out and I've seeded in November also. I've seeded in October, November, and what you try and do is you want to go out seeding when your soil temperature is less than 4 degrees Celsius and decreasing, and assuming you have good soil armor, because once again, you're protecting that wild swings of temperature. So if you can seed it in the soil when it's less than 4 degrees, temperature's dropping, you have good armor, you get good snow catch, that will then be in storage for next spring. It will germinate underneath that thatch when the soil temperature gets above 6 degrees Celsius, and it will tolerate some spring frost because it's been hardened off. Once again, just like gardening. So there is that option of going in and dormant seeding into, whether it's a pasture, it's a hayfield, it's a whatever, assuming once again you knock it back far enough in the spring so you remove that competition, or you have a thin stand, or you have a legume stand, something that is compatible with a spring cereal. If it is a legume you want to incorporate, absolutely go in and get that dormant seeding. When I was seeding my forages, my perennial forages, most of the time I was seeding into standing stubble, and I was aiming when they were calling for snow in a couple days, I would go out and I would be seeding. So using a shank drill, my shank would be dancing on the surface. So this way it wasn't seeded too deep. It was seeded, could seed through all the low spots where the water would sit in the spring. The water would disappear. My forages would come up in nice rows. So, there are some neat things we can be doing, whether it's annuals or biennials or perennials. It's looking at the toolbox and looking at what of our labor, our equipment, our what species are we looking at, and this is once again, talking to someone like Colin and say, okay, so what are you using for a cool season grass? How you doing it? How are you seeding it? How are you managing it? Yeah, these pit sessions that we have like this, it's great learning.
100%.
Yes, yes, and the more information we can share around the planet now, is great, because then we need to move all this stuff forward in all environments, and the more information or knowledge we can share, the better.
100%, Colin. And yeah, very very grateful to have you gentlemen on, and yourself, Jacqueline, and whoever else is going to get on this call. I hope you get some great value from this, and I really like this model of having both of you on, because it gives that, you know, a bit more of a well-rounded, holistic you know, view on things, because sometimes we can get so you know, down one methodology that we forget to look at everything else around it. So I just think you guys are on a bloody winner, and we're very grateful to have you on. So thank you gentlemen.
No problem. Thanks for setting this up.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Until the next
Yeah.
one, hey. All good, everyone. We'll wrap it up for now, and yeah, we'll jump on again in the coming weeks, and keep on growing.